Welcome to the second session in our mindset course, looking to empower you to end negative dieting cycles. And today we are going to be looking at emotional eating, understanding emotional eating, understanding the root causes, and also how we can learn to manage emotional eating long term. In this session, hopefully we'll be able to recognize the triggers and patterns that we have with emotional eating, and that is for you on a personal level, whilst this session will cover broader topics and it will look at some of the common triggers, causes, solutions. I really encourage you in this session to get that pen and paper out and jot along as we go through the session so that you can look to identify some of the key things that impact you individually, because emotional eating really is so different person to person. It's only by us looking at ourselves and being able to really be honest with ourselves through this process that we'll be able to gain the insight and skills needed to effectively manage our emotional eating in the long term. We're also going to look at some of the coping mechanisms that we can look to apply and hopefully start the path to developing a healthier and happier relationship with food in the long run. So, what is emotional eating? At its core, emotional eating is the tendency to eat in response to emotions rather than hunger. So, it can lead to overeating, weight gain, difficulty in managing a healthy lifestyle, as well as issues surrounding mental health, well being, self esteem, and confidence. It really is a very complex subject, but at the absolute root of it, emotional eating is when our cravings, our hunger, our desire to eat is driven by something which is emotion based versus true physical hunger. Now, in order for us to go through the rest of this session and in order for us to be able to feel a bit freer in this whole process, there are a few things that I'm going to need you to do. So, in order for us to work with ourselves from a positive, kind place, we need to start by accepting that we are emotional eaters. It sounds cliche, I know, but hear me out. Being able to accept that you're an emotional eater is the first step in being able to heal that relationship and that interaction and past that you've had with food. If we can't just accept that it's something that we struggle with, then we're never going to be able to move forward. We're always going to be fighting against it, fighting against those negative connotations that we put alongside emotional eating. Maybe there are stages in our lives where we've emotionally ate, and that has made it really, really difficult for us to be able to accept now because those periods were so dark and so difficult. And we don't want to feel associated to that time or like we're still that person today. But all we have to accept is that we are individuals, that whenever we are faced with stressors in life, regardless of what the emotion may be, and it may be a positive one, we have a tendency to turn to food for comfort, to fill a void, to disassociate from the stress of life. It is a coping strategy. It has no character assigned to it. You're not a good or bad person if you do or do not struggle with emotional eating, but we can so often place that on ourselves because of the prejudice that we face in society if we struggle with weight and with food. So I'm really going to encourage you in this session, in this moment, to accept where we are today. I'm Rachel and I am an emotional eater. And that is okay. And I am here to help you work through that. But to enable us to do that, there's a couple of things we need to do. We need to acknowledge cravings, we need to confront emotions, and we need to practice transparency. We need to acknowledge that those cravings to go to food are there. We need to confront the emotions that are causing us to have the cravings and want to go to food. And we really need to start practicing transparency, both with ourselves and trusted others. And this is so important because emotional eating and secret eating go hand in hand. They very often come together. Yes, there'll be occasions where we may comfort eat or emotionally eat when we are with loved ones, friends. Me and Jamie were prime examples of that. But there are also many occasions I know that I've been in a car park of a supermarket with whatever it is, shoving wrappers down the back of the seat and then just hoping I remember to take them out before Jamie cleans the car. In order for us to be able to break through emotional eating, we have to have an amount of transparency and honesty with ourselves, the issue that we're facing, and also with trusted others that we can use as that accountability. Now, for you, lucky lot, as a consultant, I am here to offer that to you, a place completely free of judgment, but that you can speak to, let those feelings out, say exactly how you feel, because everything you're feeling, I can guarantee you, I have probably felt as well. So, what things can impact emotional eating? There's all sorts. But as a little brief summary, some of the key things that will genuinely affect people with emotional eating are emotional triggers, our brain chemistry, tradition and family pressures, advertising and the media, chronic stress, neurodiversity, mental health, hormones. And it's important to remember that whilst emotional eating is a problem that many people face, the experiences and triggers will be completely individual. And so there may be some of these things in the list that you really relate to, and you're like, yeah, I can see how that is impacting me. There may be things on there that you've never thought about. Personally, for me, having only recently been diagnosed as neurodiverse with ADHD, I am now starting to have to come to terms and understand and put in place strategies and processes to help me manage my emotional eating when it is kind of instigated or impacted by my ADHD. And as someone who is neurodiverse, that is going to be constantly because my brain's a little spicy. So it's been a new level of delving into emotional eating for me. And I think it's really important to point out. Same goes for mental health. If you're somebody that suffers with depression, anxiety, maybe you have conditions such as bipolar, schizoaffective disorder, all of these mental health conditions are going to play a role in how you use food, your emotional eating, and the strategies that we put in place to help support you. And so, again, it's important to think about, are there those things that are impacting me? And as women, we are also going to face the delight of hormones. So, whether that is just your monthly cycle, whether you have conditions like me with PMDD, maybe you're perimenopausal or menopausal, maybe you're in that postnatal period, it's really important to look at all of these aspects because actually, when we can start looking at everything, we can start building out a plan for how we can put things into our day to day that help us manage the triggers and therefore help us manage the compulsion and desire to want to turn to food and the whole destructive cycle that can come after that. Now, the impact that emotional eating can have is vast. But if you were to have asked me 4 years ago, what is the impact emotional eating has on your life? I would have told you one thing and one thing only: weight gain. Weight gain is the impact it has on my life. But actually, there are so many reasons. There is negative impacts to physical health, but it far exceeds what the scale is showing. We know that obesity carries a caveat of lots of different conditions from diabetes, joint problems, heart problems, but it isn't just that we are being impacted by with emotional eating. There can be disruptions to our natural hunger and fullness cues, which make just day to day eating more difficult and can make us more prone to that binge restrict cycle. It can cause a lot of emotional distress. I know that so many of you watching this session now will be able to relate to that and the emotions that can be battled as a result of struggling with emotional eating. There can be a lack of self-regulation skills. There can be a lack of being able to manage stress and be able to healthily process maybe negative emotions you're feeling, such as anger, hurt, frustration. There evidently can be body image and self-esteem issues. I say evidently because everybody that is watching this course, that has been a part of this course, has experienced those things, me included. And it's important that we recognize that because that's another area that we need to work on, as are all of the areas listed here. And there's a higher risk of other addictive or negative behaviors to stress responses. Now, why it is so important that we work through the mindset aspect of emotional eating is because what we don't want to do is work on the kind of practical elements of not emotionally eating or not turning to food. But we want to do that in a way that means that we don't just divert that to something else. When you look at patients that have had bariatric surgery, one of the biggest risks to them post surgery is addiction transfer. The transfer of addiction from food into things like alcohol, gambling, shopping, or substance abuse. And it is no different when it comes to emotional eating. We fluff it up a little bit, saying emotional eating, but I know that I've used food in a way an alcoholic would use drink. I have been manipulative with people when it comes to food. I've lied when it comes to what I've eaten or what I haven't eaten. I have shown all the characteristics of an addict. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that if that is something that you can relate to, and make sure that when we go through this process, we're really taking the time and not expecting the impacts or the triggers to be resolved overnight, because likely this has been something that we've carried with us for a really long time. And so it's really important that we make sure that we give ourselves time, grace, and kindness to walk through this process at whatever pace and speed that looks like for you. So, we're going to have a bit of an activity now, and I really encourage you to not skip this bit and to get a pen and paper and do this for me. Humor me for a moment. So I want you to write down a situation that may cause you to emotionally eat. I want to know the what, where, why, who, all of that. Where are you? What's caused the emotion? What is the emotion? And that follows on to the emotions you feel. What are you feeling that you're trying to resolve? What are you trying to make better by emotionally eating? What are the feelings that are coming up? And maybe for this, it's not one scenario. Maybe you write down a couple of things for each. And then how do you feel after the eating period? So, if, for example, you've been really stressed because somebody's given you a really harsh critique at work, it's made you feel embarrassed, it's made you feel undermined, it's made you feel not respected, and therefore you've gone to food to try and fix those feelings. So, after the event, how are you feeling? What feelings are left afterwards? Write all of these down and keep them for a little bit later in the session. Now, I'm not trying to take you back to school here. I'm not trying to teach you to suck eggs. I always say if you're someone like me who has yo-yo dieted your whole life, you could have a degree in nutrition. However, it's very important when talking about emotional eating, and as we've just discussed, the fact that it is a drive to eat due to emotion versus physical hunger, that we talk about the difference between physical and emotional hunger. Physical hunger tends to come on quite gradually. There's no real sense of urgency and no specific cravings for the food that you may be wanting. You'd be happy to have anything. You're hungry. You just need to have a meal, a snack, whatever it may be. You'd be more than happy to take the time to prepare that food, and you'll have greater awareness of the tastes and the textures and the smells whilst you're eating that meal. There'll be physical signs. You might have a bit of a grumbly tummy, you might feel a little bit lethargic, and those signs will be indicating that your body is ready for some food. There will be a greater awareness of fullness when you eat. So, as you're eating the meal, you will feel that fullness increase, and there will be no emotional responses, kind of negative or positive. Although sometimes you may think, that was a really yummy meal, there's not going to be the negative emotions that can be experienced when it comes to emotional eating. Now, emotional hunger is kind of the other side of the coin. We find that it comes on very suddenly, and it's normally accompanied by panic or fear or a really great sense of urgency. I need to get that. I need to have that to eat right this moment. And the cravings are generally for quite specific food. They're generally going to be your high fat, your high sugar, your high salt food. We'll eat quite mindlessly, impulsively, without really tasting or acknowledging the food. Have you been there? I know I have, where you kind of are just putting the food in. And if somebody asked me at the end what it tastes like or if I enjoyed it, I probably couldn't tell you that much about it. It can be prone to binging or overeating. So, emotional hunger will tend to lead to that outcome versus physical hunger, where we can feel those fullness cues a little bit more clearly. They tend to persist after we've eaten. So even after we've had the meal or whatever it is, we can still be craving. We may get relief for a very short period, but then they persist. I know for me, I've had times like this where I just can't seem to get enough. We have the takeaway, you have the chocolate, it's not enough. So you seek more of it and more of it. And that can go on over the course of a few hours, it can go on over the course of a few days, it can go on over the course of a few weeks, but the cravings persist. And normally, as I'm sure lots of us have experienced with emotional eating, there is that negative kind of onslaught that we put on ourselves afterwards. We've got feelings of guilt, shame, frustration, anger, embarrassment. There's normally not many positive feelings that come after emotional eating. And this may be something that you can relate to from the task a moment ago, looking at the scenarios in which you tend to overeat or emotionally eat. Now, what's important for us to do right at the start is for us to be able to identify the patterns we have with food and our emotions. Now, if you have never really looked into this, you probably have assumptions. You can probably say, well, Rach, I know if I'm tired, if the kids have been up all night and I'm tired, I will emotionally eat. But we're making assumptions, and we're making assumptions based on reflection of past events that we probably can't recount very clearly. So, what we need to do right at the beginning is become curious, not furious, with how we are interacting with food in this moment. So, we're going to start recording things down. We need data. We need to start looking at this, removing the emotion, just becoming curious about our behaviors, our actions. And to do that, we need to collect that data first and foremost. So we're going to look at doing a food and mood diary. You may have done these in the past. You can find dedicated diaries on the likes of Amazon. We have got our own mood and food diary in the Google Drive that you can download, or you can literally get just a plain notebook, a pen, and start going from there. Now, what you're going to do is record your meals. So document everything. We're going to go back to that very early slide where we talked about practicing transparency. That is where this comes into its own. So you're going to document everything you drink, including rough sizes and kind of the snacks that you're having as well. And you're going to jot down, importantly, how you feel emotionally before eating. Are you stressed? Are you happy? Are you bored? How are you feeling before you start eating? Then we're going to track our triggers. So after eating, make a note of how you feel. Did your mood change? Do you feel guilty, satisfied, regretful? Note down how you're feeling after that meal. And from this, we can then look at identifying patterns. Do you notice any repetitive stressors? Is there any cravings that are repetitive? Are there any times? Add the times in, the days in. Are there anything there that we can find patterns with? Because if we can identify patterns, triggers, things of that nature, we empower ourselves to take action to impact those areas and have positive change. Sometimes the problem, I think, when we try and tackle emotional eating is we look at the subject way too broad. We say that I emotionally eat when I'm tired. Okay, but it's not every time I'm tired. So, what times is it that I'm tired? What are the other factors that when I'm tired mean that I can be more prone to emotionally eat? And what are the emotions that I'm feeling? Is there anything else linked with that tiredness? So, that is where this can be really, really important. And the other thing that you can do, if you're someone like me who has hormonal conditions, I've got PMDD, as I've discussed, maybe you're perimenopausal, maybe you are going through the menopause, it may also be a good thing to track your cycle at the same time so that you can see when in the cycle is this happening again, so that we can put into place things to help you with that. I know for me, I always had this idea that it was the week before my period, that the emotional eating, the cravings, everything went out of control. And actually, it wasn't until I started tracking that I realized it was a little bit earlier than that. So now I'm able to put into place strategies and tools that are a little bit earlier on that can help me get through that period. And not always successfully, but progress over perfection is what we're always going for. And that is what it can really help you to achieve. It can help you to achieve really, really clear areas that you can work on. And then, like in last week's session, when we were looking at the goals, we can set those clear goals that help us track that progress for the longer term. Here are some really important things to remember when we are tracking. We need to make sure that we're avoiding making any judgments of yourself when you record your feelings. Keep things factual. We just need to know how you're feeling. How you're feeling is not, I'm rubbish, I'm this, I'm that. If you're feeling that way, you're feeling critical of yourself. I'm being overly critical. Maybe you are feeling worried and anxious. They can be easily written down and we can understand those. Of course, if you want to elaborate in your own kind of mood and food diary surrounding, okay, what does that anxiety feel like for me? Is the feeling impacting me more than the mental sensation? An example of this is that sometimes if you suffer with anxiety and you get that sick feeling in your belly, that can be what drives you to turn to food more so than the mental feeling of being anxious. So I could be anxious on 2 different days, but on one day I feel physical symptoms much more than I do on another. And therefore, on the day that I feel those physical feelings, that's when I notice that I tend to turn to food. What I can then do is look at other things I can do to help reduce those physical side effects that I feel from anxiety, instead of making it such a blanket term that actually I don't give myself any direction in which to work and improve in those areas. Be consistent. We need a good data pool. So you need to be consistent with this. This isn't something that we're going to get kind of answers from in a week. It's probably something that's going to take a month or 2 months, even if you are also tracking cycles, to be able to really get a good picture. But it doesn't mean we need to wait that long to be able to start taking action. It's just something that I would commit to completing regularly so you can really start to see those habits. Be honest. Again, practice transparency. This is only for your eyes. Of course, you can share it with me. I am there for that accountability, but you have to at least be honest with yourself, regardless of how difficult it is to do. And I know it is hard to admit just how many, you know, of that chocolate bar I got or this I got. However, if we can't at least be honest with ourselves, we're never going to make progress with this. It's only by being honest and looking at things from a curious perspective that we can break down the shame and frustration that comes with this and be able to take actions to move forward to a healthier, happier place. Track in a way that works for you. Like I said, whether that's a diary, a note on your phone, a printable, whatever it is, do what works best for you. Don't look at how so and so is doing it and feel that you have to do it in that way. Make sure you do it in a way that works for you, because that way you're going to be able to keep consistent with that tracking long term. And take time to reflect. Maybe have a reflection page at the end of every week where you go through and just summarize, what are some of the patterns I'm seeing? Are there any trends? Are there any reoccurring cravings, reoccurring feelings? And that way you're able to kind of look back, and from that, we'll be able to take the steps to look at the areas that we can tweak in order for you to start making progress with the emotional eating and those cravings going forward. Now, once we've got all of that data, we can start putting into place plans to help us challenge those cravings going forward. And to do that, we have the accountability action plan, which you may have seen, you may have used before, but hopefully after this session, you may be able to apply it and use it in a slightly more productive way moving forward. So there are 3 elements to the accountability action plan. Our triggers. So that is where we're going to write down all the things that are our triggers. So we need to be honest here. No one has to know what you're writing down, but hiding it from yourself will hinder you being able to make progress. So writing those triggers down and being honest with them is really important. Then we're going to have a look at the effects those triggers have. So what happens when they are activated? This is behaviors, mood changes, negative coping strategies. Those are the things we're going to make note of. And then we're going to look at solutions. So what solutions can I put in place that are going to help with the negative effects of those triggers? And a little bit of a spoiler, none of those solutions are going to do with calorie counting or anything of that nature, because this isn't as much about what we are putting on our plates. As I say time and time again, we are interested about what is happening in our minds. So let's look at accountability action plan triggers. So after reviewing our trackers, we can then clearly identify our triggers, not to one isolated event, but rather the overarching scenarios which can lead us to emotionally eat. This is my example. So for me, I can see that overall, the things that seem to impact my emotional eatings are things like tiredness, my hormones, if I feel overstimulated, my family being poorly, higher anxiety, if I've got lots of social events on, if I'm feeling a lot of imposter syndrome, and lack of alone time. I've done my tracking, and from that, I can see that these seem to be the areas in which, if they are happening, they can cause issues that lead me to want to emotionally eat. So once we've got the triggers, we can then look at the effects. So these are going to be the behaviors or signs that we are more likely to emotionally eat. So the triggers have happened. I'm feeling more tired. My hormones are playing havoc. What impact, what behaviors does that cause me to present with that I can look out for to know that I'm more likely to emotionally eat? And this is where it's important to break down the things that are maybe triggering you. So, okay, tiredness I know is triggering me, but if I'm tired, what am I feeling? Or what am I doing? If I'm anxious, what am I feeling? What behaviors am I displaying? Keep all of that in your tracker. Now, for me, I can very clearly see that if I am triggered, then the things that tend to happen are I shut down, I want to sleep more, I start spending money I do not have online. We've all been there. I distance myself from people and things that I love. I can be overcritical of my work. I'm more hateful towards myself. I'll pick myself apart. I can have bigger mood swings and feel anxious and frustrated with myself. And I can use food negatively. So I now know that if I start shutting down, if I start spending a bit too much money, if the old Klarna's coming out a bit too much, if I'm being really critical, say I'm getting dressed and I'm being really critical towards myself, that is an indication that I am in a period of time where I'm more likely to have cravings, impulses, and the desire to emotionally eat and turn to food to fix how I am feeling. And it's important that I know this because these things are before the kind of last trigger pull that means that I do go and emotionally eat. So if we can tackle these areas, then it means that actually we're going to better manage this long term. Because when you get triggered to emotionally eat, we get put into that fight or flight mindset. It's very difficult in that mindset, if not impossible, to bring rationale and objectivity into that thought process. We are being run by emotions and adrenaline and that primal instinct to either fight against something, run towards it, run away, all the rest of it. So it's important that we have things in place that are running constantly. Emotional eating isn't something you fix in the moment, it's something you fix over time. And that is why understanding the behaviors that you may experience before a period of emotional eating is important, because actually you could be demonstrating these behaviors but have no desire to emotionally eat in these moments. But if these are left unchecked and left to continue on, that's when we know that it can culminate in looking to emotionally eat. So now we can look at the solutions, and the solutions are directly linked to the effects that the triggers are having in our lives. So, for example, I make my bed every morning. It helps me feel in control. It helps me feel like I have got some sense of the day is going to be okay. And it helps reduce my anxiety levels. As silly as that might sound to some, others will completely get it. I will also make sure to do my skincare each day. I would take that time to prioritize myself and be kind towards myself because I know that those triggers can make me be more hateful towards myself. So I want to be kind towards myself. I've removed all of my saved card details from the internet on my phone, so I can't just tappy tap 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 and spend money that I don't have. And actually, then if I find myself going to my bag to get my card out and it's not something that I plan to purchase, I can kind of stop myself and be like, well, okay, what is going on here? I make sure to journal. Journaling really, really helps me. I tell those I love and trust that I'm struggling. So for me, because there can be a lot of shame and a lot of guilt around emotional eating, I practice transparency and I talk to people about when that is happening. And that is really helpful because emotional eating thrives in secret. I know we've talked about that earlier in the session. It really does thrive in secret and it is insidious. It will come into your life whenever you kind of least expect it, out of many other things that we may struggle with. And so by being open with people that I'm struggling, and not necessarily struggling with food, this is just struggling in general. Maybe I'm overwhelmed with work or my kids or whatever it is. I have learned to be more open with telling people that, look, I am struggling. I need a little bit of help. I don't have binge foods in the house. So we will all have certain foods that we know are big triggers. For me, I've talked about it again and again, it's biscuits. I cannot have biscuits in the house. I cannot have fancy cereal in the house. Those two foods, it's a recipe for disaster. So they just don't come in my house. And people will often say to me, but how do you do that when Poppy's in the house? Well, I buy Poppy her biscuits. She has Kindercard biscuits. um, and they are separate, and they are her biscuits, and they're not something that I'm going to look to binge on. However, if I had hobnobs or digestives or something like that in the house, they would all be gone. So again, because we've been practicing transparency and we've been speaking to our loved ones about the difficulties that we're having with this, we can say to them, I just cannot have that food in the house because it just makes me like more likely to want to comfort eat or binge eat. And the fallout of that is not me moaning about my jeans being too small. It's all the other emotional issues that I'm going to face and battle with as a result of it. I am a better mum, daughter, wife, friend if I have this under control. And so that is where having those conversations and having that open transparency is so, so key. And I schedule time just for me. And generally that is watching YouTube videos. That is what relaxes me. I like a B&M haul. I like watching makeup tutorial videos. So that is really important for me. I know I need that because if I feel too overstimulated, if I feel like there's too much going on, too much of a social calendar, I need that time. So whenever I know that we have got busier periods of time coming up, that's when I'll really make an effort to schedule some time just for me, book that afternoon off and just go home and watch The Real Housewives or, Love is Blind, whatever it is. But make sure that you're finding those pockets of time just for yourself and doing that without guilt or requirement of explanation to anybody. If you need that time, you need that time. So I want you to look back at the scenarios that we wrote out earlier in this session, and using the accountability plan, I want you to try and identify what some triggers may be, what some effects may be from the triggers, and potentially a couple of solutions that you could use for those specific scenarios. Like I said, we have got the accountability plan available in a PDF download that I will include with this training session. So feel free to download that and then go through and write out the triggers, effects, and solutions for your scenarios that we had earlier in this session. So once we understand some of more kind of the mental, the lifestyle, the behavioral things that may be driving us to emotionally eat, we then also need to look at how we respond to hunger. Now, everyone's response to hunger will be different, but if you're an emotional eater, it tends to be more amplified than somebody who doesn't struggle with emotional eating. There tends to be more emotion that gets brought up when we feel hunger. And this can have a couple of impacts. It can mean that we overconsume food or we emotionally eat in scenarios that we otherwise wouldn't expect to. And it can also mean that we can't get those daily habits in place in order to sustain a healthier relationship with food long term, because each time we feel hunger, it's triggering this emotional response in us. So there tends to be four ways that I have found that people respond to hunger, from working with clients and my own experience, that tend to be the main kind of core reasons that people struggle. However, like we've said, this is so individual, and there may be things that I haven't discussed in this session that you actually relate to, and that is totally valid. This is a overview of emotional eating and understanding it and understanding some of the causes, some of the reasons why we can struggle. But I really encourage you to use this as a kind of springboard to, again, be curious, not furious with yourself, and really delve into some of the things that maybe you experience on a more personal level. So the first thing that people tend to experience is discomfort. Um, and I don't mean that just in the physical sense of my belly is rumbling, I'm uncomfortable. I mean on a much deeper emotional sense. That feeling of hunger creates a great sense of discomfort in them. So it can bring up maybe feelings and emotions and all of that that take you back to times that you've experienced emotional discomfort that you couldn't resolve. And therefore you turn to food in those moments. Does discomfort of feeling hungry now trigger an emotional response versus a physical response? And therefore, it's harder to deal with. I know for me personally, that feeling of discomfort is challenging, but it isn't challenged because I can't handle physical discomfort. It's because I have related it so much to emotional discomfort. And, there will be scenarios, experiences, trauma that all of us have experienced potentially, that those two things may go hand in hand, emotional and physical discomfort. And because now we are experiencing physical, we've kind of made the two go hand in hand. So it's really, really important that we can acknowledge these things and be able to try and implement strategies that are going to help us in the long term be able to overcome them. So let's go through some of the things that you can do if you respond to hunger with the feeling of discomfort that's emotionally driving you. There's a trigger there. I'm going to be looking down. I've just got my phone here to read through some of the things that we can do. So we can try writing down our thoughts and feelings and help identify the difference between emotional and physical hunger. If you're somebody that struggles with this, then you are likely going to be somebody that really has to hone in and work on that differential between I'm physically hungry and I am emotionally hungry. Because if you can be able to split those apart and realize, right, I am physically hungry, there is no risk to me emotionally here, then you're more likely to be able to handle that in a bit more of a positive way. Same way as if you're feeling emotionally hungry and it's causing discomfort, you again can be like, okay, I am emotionally in need of something right now, but that is not food. Food's not going to fix that. We can remind ourselves that discomfort from hunger will end quite quickly. Maybe it's at the start of plan and you're constantly finding that you're in this cycle of only being able to do like a week and then you're coming off plan and, kind of running away. That first few days when it is very uncomfortable can be really challenging for some people. But by reminding ourselves, this will pass 3 to 5 days at the beginning, generally, and that, things will get easier, you will feel better. But reassuring yourself of that, reaching out to me and having my reassurance, speaking to the group and getting other people's experiences and their own reassurance can be really, really beneficial with this. Keep hydrated. It's a really boring one, but it is so true. Hydration is absolutely key. It helps manage our hunger levels. It also helps manage our sugar levels. It helps us not deal with things like feeling lethargic or getting headaches. So, really important to stay hydrated. Though, when people used to say to me, "You're not hungry, you're thirsty," I could have slapped them, but there is some truth to be had in it. So, keep hydrated. And like I said, remember the feeling will pass and find those distractions. If you're somebody where this can come into play, those distractions are going to be really, really useful for you. So finding things like going and cleaning the bathroom or doing a hobby or a craft or something of that nature, going out for a walk, those things can be really, really useful because you're going to divert your brain's thinking from focusing on the discomfort we're feeling and actually looking to focus on something else. The next one is one that I know a lot of people suffer with, and that is that when we feel hungry, our instinct is to have this almost FOMO, fear of missing out, feeling triggered. Have you found out that you've missed out on life from previous diets? Are we coming forward being like, I'm angry that I've had to be on diets in the past and I have given up, Christmases, I have given up birthdays and holidays to stick to these plans and they haven't worked. I don't want to miss out on any more of my life because of having to diet. And whilst very rationally we can think those two things don't necessarily have to be interlinked, you may be somebody that now when you feel hunger, you naturally have that kind of defensive response to, I'm not missing out on any more life. And that can be something that makes sticking to good habits really difficult because hunger is something we will all experience. It's normal to feel hungry from time to time. And if it generates this kind of response, then it can have quite a negative impact on our responses to it. So if you are dealing with the fear of missing out kind of being triggered whenever you are feeling hungry, the first thing you have to do is probably the hardest, and that is to forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for having those attempts in the past where perhaps you haven't had the right structure or things in place to help you succeed with whatever plan or diet that you were attempting. It is not your fault. It isn't your fault that there wasn't the support that was needed and that an arbitrary plan was provided to you without any thought about how that may need to be tailored to you or what support you may need. There may not be any support whatsoever. And actually, you may have been met with a lot of the toxic diet history and culture that we have all had, which meant that whenever we weren't able to stick to these rules of these diet formats, it only reinforced that stigma and the negative connotations that we held towards people who struggled with food and obesity. So we have to be able to forgive ourselves for that and understand that, it wasn't that we weren't successful on any of those things because we just thought, screw it, I'm going to make my future selves life more difficult. It was because we were struggling. And if it was a friend, a family member, a child, that was feeling the way you were feeling then, you would approach the situation and how you acted towards them very differently to how you act towards yourself. So that forgiveness is so important. Then another good thing to do is to write down what you're missing out on because of the diet cycle. The fear of missing out, you haven't missed out because you've been hungry or because you haven't had that meal per se. It's more likely because that cycle has repeated itself continually. If the cycle had only happened once, we wouldn't be here now. So the issue is not necessarily with that meal you said no to, the holiday you stuck to plan on, or whatever it was. The issue is that the cycle is continually repeating, that we can't get off the hamster wheel. And so, another really important thing to recognize, I suppose, is that that does have negative impacts in our life. And in order for us to really build that strong why and that drive for how we move forward, we need to look at what the diet cycle and what this cycle and what emotional eating is taking from our lives. We're missing out because of this cycle. So I need to be really honest and realize that actually making good choices or having really good habits or boundaries or guardrails in place is not what makes me miss out on life. It's this cycle that is continually repeating itself that is having that impact. And, don't become angry at yourself. Don't become frustrated at yourself about this. Put the anger and frustration where it's meant to be, which is with that cycle, with the environment, with the preconceived ideas, taboos, misconceptions that society has placed against people that struggle with their bodies, with food, and the like. That is where we put our frustration and we become determined to fight through that. And remember that food will always be there. Food will always be there for us. We're not missing out on that birthday cake and therefore missing out on the birthday and the experiences and everything else. But for so many of us, food has become the main focal point of any experience because maybe, for example, we are anxious about going on that night out. We've got nothing to wear. We don't feel good. Oh God, don't get the camera out. Don't ask me to get on the dance floor. How far am I going to have to walk? The experience is the only joy in an experience at the moment, maybe food. So that is as well why that FOMO is heightened, because for us, in order to enjoy the experience, food has to be a part of it, because otherwise there isn't much at the moment that we enjoy. And so it's reminding ourselves that the food will always be there and the food does not make the experience. The people, the memories, the jokes, the laughter, those are the things that make the experience. And actually, I'm not missing out on them because I am saying no to birthday cake. I'm missing out on them because I am letting this unhealthy, toxic cycle continue. Which includes emotional eating. And so that is where I need to focus so that I can look at ending that cycle. If you can hear a small child making lots of babbly noises, I apologise. It's really hot today. The window is open and the kids are playing outside. But let's go on to the next one, which is control. Now, control is something that I know a lot of people can struggle with. A lot of us are control freaks, and that's okay. And what's really important to remember is, whilst emotional eating or binging can feel very out of control, it offers us a really warped sense of control, because it's almost an ability for us to say, well, it doesn't matter what you say, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter how you make me feel. I can control if I want to eat this. I can control if I'm going to eat this. And so when you realize that you are someone that this resonates with, that this is something that you find in your life, it can mean that we can put things in place to help you have a greater sense of control, so we're not seeking that through food. And also it can mean that in the beginning of plan, or if you have really hungry days, or whatever it is, maybe you're due on your period and you're feeling more hungry than normal, that physical hunger, not the emotional hunger, it can trigger this sense of a loss of control because you're feeling hungry. Because as long as I'm full, as long as I'm not hungry, I'm in control. When we all know that actually we're probably the opposite, although it is, like I say, a warped sense of control. So things that we can do for this is to remember that no one's forcing us to do the plan. No one's forcing us to make good choices. Sometimes that inner rebel can come out, like I said, kind of stamping your feet, that teenager that's like, you can't tell me what to do. No one is making us do this. This is a choice. Actually, us choosing to be on plan, us choosing to have that meal, have these snacks as we've planned to have them, that is our choice. I get to do that. And sometimes changing that language can be so important because we can tell ourselves, tell our brain that no, we are in control of this. I'm choosing to do this. I'm not being forced to do it by somebody else, by society, by anyone. This is what I am choosing to do. And that again is why the session from last week around goals is so important to do first, because it feeds through into all of these things. Because you've created these goals that aren't about a weight on the scale, that aren't about that toxic diet culture. They're about the true things that you want and that serve you, and that should help give you some further control. We need to recognize the achievements we're making each day to reinforce that this is a positive. I'm in control, I've chosen to do this, and look at the positives that are happening will help reinforce that sense of control for you. And try and install routines in your day that give you that control outside of food. So back to the earlier examples I gave regarding some of my solutions, making the bed is a big one for that for me, because it just gives me that sense of control straight off the back of the day. That I've done that, things are going to go okay today. And it can be sometimes the smallest little things that we do day to day that can really instill that sense of control, because, day to day, we maybe don't have much control. If you've got kids, you probably haven't got a lot of control over your day. With our jobs, with lots of things, we don't have as much control over. But if we can find the little moments of control we do have, and that could be, like I said, simple things like making your bed, time blocking your calendar, making sure that you take a lunch. All of those things can have really big impacts on your feelings of being in control of you and your life and your little bubble that we all operate in. And the last one is energy scarcity. So basically, if you feel hungry, you feel like you're going to drop down dead, you get panicked by the thought of being tired, having no energy. And again, I can relate to this. Tiredness is a huge trigger for me. And it's because that fatigue, that tiredness almost makes me feel scared. I think, how on earth am I gonna manage to do everything I need to get done? So sometimes we can feel hungry, and naturally we think, I'm hungry, so that's going to mean I'm going to be tired. That's going to mean I have no energy. And again, we panic. Um, but we don't have to. It is okay. If you're someone that is struggling with that link between hunger and energy, it's important to recognize that we will all feel tired, and that is okay. Nothing terrible is going to happen. The expectations of ourselves don't have to be through the roof. Progress over perfection, always. That is an A. That is something we're really trying to instill in ourselves, because the tendency to panic with feeling hungry and therefore being, I'm going to be knackered, is that we've set such high expectations for ourselves that the thought of trying to accomplish everything that we feel we need to is nigh on impossible, and therefore we panic. um Make sure that you eat regularly and have products regularly. This was something I did. Every 3 to 4 hours I would have my products, and it was so that my blood sugar was nice and steady. I didn't have those cravings. One thing that you're really going to struggle with, if this is something that you can relate to, is that if your blood sugars are dipping because you're not having products or meals regularly, you will feel hunger, and then you're going to get in this cycle, right, where then you panic, so then you reach for something quick that maybe isn't a product because you need the energy. And you find yourself in that loop. Whereas if you keep things really nice and consistent, then you're not going to experience that as much. And that may mean that your eating times are different. So, for example, I can sometimes have my larger evening meal at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because that is what works for me. I can have my big meal then, I'll have a bar at 7 o'clock or a snack at 7 o'clock in the evening. It may mean that you have, your larger meal at lunchtime and a lighter meal in the evening. Maybe that works better for you. It can mean that you eat smaller meals throughout the day rather than 3 bigger meals. This is where it's really important to deconstruct the ideas that we've been given of how we should eat, and instead focus on what is going to work best for me. And if something like this is something you relate to, then you're going to have to really look at that and look at the eating pattern that you have. But also, you're going to have to make it a priority to eat, and maybe it changes then the products that you use or the options of food that you use. It's no secret that I don't like cooking, and I like a cheeky little pre-prepared meal. A lot of that is to do with the fact that if I start feeling hungry, I will start feeling like I'm going to have no energy to do anything. I will panic, and I will reach for quick options. And so for me, to protect that, a guardrail, a safety net I have in place, is to have those easy, pre-prepared options that I can just get out and bung in the oven. And the other reason why that is quite good is because we will so often tell ourselves, I can't make that, I'm so tired. I'm so tired, I can't do this. I'm so tired, I can't do that. And actually, yes, you may be tired. As blood sugar dips, as we feel hungry, yes, there is an element of tiredness, but we can amplify that. And therefore mean that we kind of shut off, and that's when we're on delivery or ordering a takeaway. So take away the stigmas, take away the prejudice that you have against yourself, the opinions or criticism you have against yourself for eating in certain ways, and instead become curious, not furious, and lean into the things that are going to make it easier for you, regardless of whether or not that works with society's picture of how we should eat or how we've been told we should be intermittent fasting. That's never going to work for someone like me. I need to eat regularly. For you, that may be something that works for you. This may not be something that you relate to. But again, that's why it's so important that you figure out what is going to work best for me because it works best for me, rather than what's gonna work best for me, but actually it's not working best for me. It's what I'm told I should be doing. So I'm gonna do that because if I don't eat in that way, I'm a bad person. I'm not a disciplined person. I've not got motivation. I'm not going to be successful. All these things can be brought up from something as simple as a feeling on a pattern of way in which we eat. And it's because these things go so far back and there are so many judgments, open judgments in the world about it. So again, it's really important to look at, because otherwise all the work that we have just done on finding the triggers and the behaviors and the solutions that we're going to implement, all of that could be thrown on its head, because then the minute you feel hungry, one of these four scenarios could be brought up and then it throws everything completely off. We have to look at this as a full picture and look at all the things that we can do that are going to help us be able to put actual plans in place so that we can better manage it. And it may be that for you, you relate more to this than what we discussed with the accountability plan, and that is fine. This may be an area that you need to do more work on. It may be that that physical feeling of hunger is triggering you more emotionally than actually the stress that you think is triggering it in work. Maybe because you were stressed in work, you haven't eaten all day, so therefore you are hungry and it is triggering one of these reactions. And that's where it's important to understand both sides, and then we can look at how we move forward with the plans. Now, if energy is something that you struggle with, like I said, we need to make sure that we know that it is normal. We need to make sure we're having our products or food regularly, and we need to focus on that rest and recuperation. So if you're somebody that is very go, 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 maybe you've got kids, maybe you aren't getting a lot of sleep at night. Well, maybe then it's a case that we have to work on that. We have to work on that sleep routine. Am I scrolling in bed for 3 hours? Am I putting the TV on in bed at night? Do I need to remove the screens from the bedroom? Am I giving myself, that routine to decompress from the day? Or am I really stressed in work? Then I've got to commute home. Then I'm making the kids tea. Then I'm trying to figure out our tea. Then I'm getting them all ready for bed. And then I'm crashing. I'm not giving myself time to bring myself down. And things that you may do that can actually help with that are really, really simple. So it may be that when you get in from work, yes, the kids are running around. Fine, have your Kindle for a minute, put the TV on. I'm going to go and sit on the sofa with a cup of tea. Or I'm going to go into my bedroom and have a little cup of tea for 5-10 minutes. I'm going to sit in the garden. I'm just going to bring a little bit of a spacer between the stress of work and the stress inevitably we have at home as parents. It may be that whenever the kids have gone to bed, you then take the time to run yourself a bath, put a face mask on, having those bits of time that you can relax, bring that nervous system down, because that is what's going to enable you to get better rest than if we're just basically conking out in bed because we are absolutely knackered after spending hours scrolling on social media, which we have all done. Okay, we're getting there. I know we've been taken to school during this session and there's a lot to take in. And I don't expect you after this session alone to be completely all over it. I just want us all to understand that actually emotional eating is not you. You are not the problem. There are other things that are going on that mean that emotional eating is a strategy and a result of a lot of different factors in our lives. And actually, if we can identify them, then we give ourselves the power to be able to implement strategies to improve it. Those strategies are not, I'm going to go on a really harsh diet or I'm going to do this with my food. Because as you will see from this session, very little of it is to actually do with food. And if I said it once, I'll say it till my dying day. We need to focus more on what's on our mind than what's on our plates. And that is what I hope that this session has enabled us to do. So we can now understand that we need to identify whether the hunger we're feeling is emotional or physical. From that, we can understand the triggers, the effects, and have those solutions in place. So we're tracking to identify, then we can do something like the accountability plan to understand those different solutions. And, we can use the responses to hunger in our tracking to elaborate on that a bit more. And then we're able to be honest and mindful of our emotional responses to hunger, how we are responding to it. And from all of those things, we are then able to equip ourselves with the tools we need to be able to start making the little steps to move forward and gain a bit more control and understanding over emotional eating, and hopefully eliminate the shame, the guilt, the negative emotions that we feel towards ourselves, which only keep us trapped in this cycle. So, in order for us to break it, there are some strategies and things that we need to do in order to get there. The first, as we said at the start of the session, accept the problem. Accept the problem as a problem and not as a problem with you. It's a problem that everyone watching this session deals with. So it's not a you problem. It is just an issue. It is a thing that many people struggle with. So you don't need to feel bad for yourself, because if you're sat thinking I'm a bad person or I'm rubbish or I lack discipline because you're an emotional eater, you then in turn think of that of everyone else on this call or everyone else who does this session, which I know you're not. I know you would never think that of anyone else. And so we have to start accepting it and just unraveling all of those negative things that we think of ourselves as a result of being someone who suffers with it. We're going to build those emotional regulation techniques. So we're going to take that time to track and see where are our struggles so that we can then enable ourselves to have the strategies and build the things that we need in order to better deal with them. And in future sessions, we're going to look at some more specific strategies and ways that we can help our emotional regulation, such as being able to say no to others so we can say yes to the things that matter to us, and doing that without feeling, the people pleaser in us going crazy. We're going to pause when we feel hungry and we're going to assess, is it emotional? Is it physical? How am I feeling? What are the things that are coming up? And we're going to track that down. We're going to build that support system. I am that support system if you need it. And we're going to be honest about it. We're going to be honest to the people that we need to be honest with, because, maybe we live with them. Maybe we are with them every single day. It doesn't mean we need to declare it to the office or say to all the mums at the school gate, but those people that are at the sharp end of our defensiveness and our reactions and our negative traits that we may have whenever we're going through a particularly difficult period of emotional eating. It's important that they understand the actual problem, the impacts that it's having, and why it's important that, for example, we don't have biscuits in the house, because, it would be the same as if I was an alcoholic. Would you have loads of alcohol in the house? Probably not. We're going to have those consistent meal and eating times, especially if that energy scarcity is something that you can relate to when you feel hungry. We're going to do the food and mood tracking. Be curious, not furious. That's really important. We're going to remove any of the labeling of ourselves in that process and just write down the facts. We can be kind to ourselves and give ourselves grace through all of this each day. Set realistic goals and take small steps to achieve them. And those cannot be weight related when it comes to emotional eating, because weight is a symptom. It's not an actual core issue of the problem. And so having the symptom as a goal, it's not tackling the real issue. It's keeping us distracted and looking at something else and trying to make this a very, pragmatic. It's simple. I just stop eating that food, or I reduce what I'm eating and it will fix the problem. It won't. So the goals that we make in regards to our journey with emotional eating and how we better manage that, not weight related. Not at all. And again, hopefully last week's session on goal setting can help you start building out what some of those look like, and send them to me. Send them in the group if that's something you're comfortable doing, to really help add that layer of accountability as well. And maybe make a little list of non-food celebrations to reward yourself along the way. Too often we only reward ourselves with either food, and if we're on diets, we only reward ourselves when we hit weight goals. And actually, we need to be rewarding ourselves constantly. Did you get through that presentation at work? Brilliant. Go get yourself that lipstick you've been wanting for ages. Did you manage to really identify some issues and triggers that you're going to work through? Amazing. Get yourself into the salon and get your hair done. You've been waiting for ages. Maybe you've been able to get through a really challenging time personally. Girl, go and get yourself a massage. Like, so many times we don't have these things that we can celebrate with that are non-food because we have isolated ourselves off so much that food is the only thing really that can bring us joy. And so we need to start building out those other ways that we can celebrate ourselves and care for ourselves that are non-food related, to start separating those kind of emotional warped links that we have with food, and actually start being able to celebrate and be proud of ourselves and put ourselves out of our comfort zone a little bit to help us grow. And with that in mind, we have got some little homework tasks again this week. So, acceptance is going to be a big one. And it's probably not something that maybe you're going to have instantly. It might be something you need to work through. So, I really encourage you to continue to work through that and accept that emotional eating is not a bad trait. It is merely a coping strategy that perhaps isn't the healthiest for us. And we're going to work through that. I want you all to do your food and mood diaries this week in whichever way works for you. And do send them over to me at the end of the week, at the end of each day, whatever you like. Have that accountability, practice that transparency. Access support. So, really make sure that you get that support in place. Make sure you've got your calls booked in with me. Make sure that if you're saying you're going to send me that mood and food diary every day, you do it. Like, have that consistency, be accountable. I can chase people till people are blue in the face, until I'm blue in the face. But ultimately, we have to have self drive to be motivated to do this. And again, as we discussed earlier, that could be from making that list of what is emotional eating taking from me? What is this diet cycle taking from me? Use those as the things that drive you versus I'm this much weight and I want to be this much weight. Because that's, it's not going to be the strongest driver in the world. And be kind. I want you all to do one thing for you this week, which is for you and gives you time to relax, to breathe, and to take time for yourself. That could be as small as having a cup of tea in the garden in peace, or you could take yourself off for a swanky spa day. I mean, it could be that or anything in between. But start bringing in little things that show you being kind to yourself. And again, it could be, buying some sheet masks and putting them on. You're going to get your nails done. It could be anything at all. You could be saying no to that event that you've said you're going to go to, but you've been dreading it. You really don't want to go. Say no. Again, we'll cover it in a future session. But I really encourage you to do at least one thing. And I want you to message me a picture or something, again, to have accountability for doing that lovely thing for yourself. I love this quote from Oprah Winfrey, and I think it really, when I first ever saw it, it really hit home to me that this is exactly what I do with food and how I want my relationship with food to be. Is it there just now? It's much more there than it was. Emotional eating takes a long time to unpick. Different life scenarios, different challenges will come up that can kind of mean that you have to reassess and relook at it. But ultimately, my relationship with food, I want to use it to nourish me, not anesthetize me. And I think for so many of us, we have used food to dissociate, to distract, to fill emptiness inside that is in no way physical. And we use it to numb. And I don't want to be numbed by food anymore. I want to be in a position where I can experience emotion and feel emotion and have the skills required in order to process it. And I want that for me. I want that for you. And I want that for the next generation, who need to be taught the coping strategies and the ways in which to manage stresses and emotions in ways that we weren't, which is why we turn to food, maybe, most likely. So hopefully now we have been able to start to recognize the triggers and patterns of emotional eating. Hopefully learn a couple of coping mechanisms or strategies that we can start putting into place to trial and see if they work. They may not work straight away, and that is okay. But you never know if you don't try. So we're gonna try. We're gonna start putting those in place. And hopefully this has been a moment that we can all begin to take steps to build a healthier, less judgmental relationship with yourself and with emotional eating. And the way in which we maybe have used food, because it is so, so important that we walk forward with an understanding that we are not problems. The fact that we use food does not make us any kind of way. It is something that probably most likely we picked up at a really young age when we were in a bad place, and it was the only thing that we could control, or that could give us comfort, or that could help us process these big emotions that we didn't have any understanding of. So, if you go through this and you find yourself having moments where you're being harsh or critical or letting those things come into your mind, just remember that actually the person who implemented these strategies to begin with was probably a little kid. And if that little kid was stood in front of you now, would you spend your time being horrible to them and badgering them and, calling them all the names you call yourself now? Or would you be sitting down with them, understanding the problem, understanding how you could help, and putting things in place to support them and help them walk through that process? I think we all know the answer to that one. Thank you so much for joining me for the second session of our mindset course, not mindful course. I hope that this has been useful. The future sessions are going to explore some areas a bit more in depth. We're going to be exploring more strategies a bit more in depth, and how we can implement them where maybe at the minute you're thinking, Rach, I can't do that. It's going to make me an anxious mess. Don't worry. We're going to go through everything in a little bit more detail. Yes, these sessions are thorough. Yes, we go into a lot of detail, but that is the whole point of this course, is to really start looking at the reasons why. And hopefully in just 2 weeks, you've seen that there's much more to our weight and food struggles than our portion sizes or picking the wrong type of foods. It's so much greater than that. And hopefully this can be a journey where you can look at exploring those things at your own pace, with no judgment, being kind to yourself, and build the foundations and strategies that we all need to help us better manage this going forward. Look, if you're an emotional eater, I can't tell you that it's ever going to go away. I'm now in my 4th year of maintenance. I am still an emotional eater. It's still something that I have to manage. However, I can manage it much more pragmatically now. And actually, negative feelings towards me having an emotional eating episode are not there. It happens and I move on with my life. And that, for me, is managing it, because it's the same way someone might have a glass of wine of an evening. It doesn't mean they're an alcoholic. They're just having a glass of wine to relax. I feel like I can have much more of that type of relationship with emotional eating now, where I can use food for comfort, but it doesn't spiral into something really negative and toxic and awful. So hopefully that is some kind of aspiration to where we can get to with it. But it is something that we're probably all going to face for a long time and have to work through. And we will. And we will do it one step at a time. And the best thing about the course is you can come back and rewatch this. You can go back and watch other episodes and try and maybe look at it through a different lens, or with different examples or real life examples in that time that you are struggling. So I hope they're useful for you. Thank you so much. If you are part of the current challenge group, there will be a link to a feedback form in the challenge group. And I would appreciate any feedback on all sessions that are carried out, both on this platform and live. So all of your feedback is appreciated. It is really taken into consideration when planning future episodes, and keep saying episodes, future sessions. And I appreciate all of your lovely, constructive words and feedback. And just encourage you that if you have got any big thoughts after this session, if you've got any questions, reach out, book your calls in, and just know I am always there.